The comment sections are lighting up with people saying nobody wants artificial intelligence data centers in their towns, and the level of backlash has reached a fever pitch. A recent 2026 Quinnipiac University poll out of Pennsylvania found that 68% of registered voters flat out oppose having an AI data center built in their community. I read a comment this morning that summed up the public mood. It said, "Nobody wants AI data centers, and everyone I know believes that they and the billionaires building them are evil." That is a heavy statement. It is also more important than people realize, not because it is entirely correct, but because a massive portion of the public feels this way right now. And honestly, that reaction did not come out of nowhere.
The reaction is a direct response to a sudden shift in visibility. For years, almost nobody talked about data centers. People use streaming platforms, cloud storage, online banking, and search engines every single day without giving a second thought to the physical buildings powering all of it. Data centers stayed invisible. They were just quiet, nondescript warehouses out in the suburbs or near industrial parks. Artificial intelligence completely changed that dynamic. Now, suddenly, the public is hearing about massive power consumption, giant server campuses, heavy water usage, the need for new substations, and severe grid strain. For the first time, digital infrastructure became highly visible and highly controversial.
Before we get into the mechanics of why the public is pushing back, let us look at the scale of what we are dealing with. According to a 2025 report by the International Energy Agency, global data centers consumed about 415 terawatt-hours of electricity in 2024. That is roughly 1.5% of total global electricity use. The IEA projects that figure will more than double to 945 terawatt-hours by 2030, which is basically the equivalent of Japan's entire annual electricity consumption. That feels unsustainable. If I am living in a rural community or a suburb and I hear that a facility requiring the power of a small nation is moving next door, my immediate reaction is going to be defensive.
That defensive reaction makes sense when you look at the localized impact. We are no longer talking about standard data centers. AI data centers operate on an entirely different scale of power density. A traditional facility might use a few dozen megawatts. According to recent infrastructure analyses from organizations like Epoch AI, the total AI data center power capacity reached approximately 30 gigawatts in late 2025. That is comparable to the peak power usage of the entire state of New York. A single large AI facility can demand anywhere from 100 megawatts to a full gigawatt of electricity. It is not just the power draw, Henry. It is the nature of the computing workloads. Traditional servers sit idle for periods of the day. AI workloads, especially inference tasks like powering enterprise search or live chatbots, run continuously. The graphics processing units required for these tasks consume more energy and generate far more heat.
The heat generation brings us to the next massive point of contention, which is water. Communities are raising valid concerns about local resources being diverted. A report from the Environmental and Energy Study Institute found that large data centers can consume up to 5 million gallons of water per day for cooling purposes. That is the usage equivalent of a town of up to 50,000 people. We are seeing real-world pushback because of this. In Naperville, Illinois, the city council recently voted down a proposed data center after months of intense resident opposition, primarily focused on heavy water use and potential increases in utility costs. The industry cannot just expect communities to blindly accept every project without asking hard questions about resource allocation.
The pushback in places like Illinois is a prime example of the tension. In nearby Aurora, Illinois, the city actually implemented a 180-day pause on new data center developments that expires in March 2026, just so they could figure out how to zone and regulate them properly. Local leaders realized that treating a gigawatt AI facility the same as a logistics warehouse was a mistake. They have entirely different impacts on the neighborhood. The water issue is particularly complex because most AI data centers rely on liquid cooling to keep those densely packed server racks from melting down. They run municipal water over cold plates or use large evaporative cooling towers. When a developer attempts to build one of these facilities in an area already prone to drought or with limited aquifer capacity, the local backlash is immediate and fierce.
It goes beyond just water and electricity. Let us discuss the broader environmental and quality of life impacts. We are seeing reports of communities fighting back over noise pollution from the massive cooling fans. In Memphis, Tennessee, Residents are dealing with the installation of over 30 natural gas turbines intended for daily use at a new data center, according to the World Resources Institute. That introduces continuous air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions right into a local community. If an industry requires independent gas turbines just to keep the lights on because the local grid cannot handle the load, that seems like a massive failure of infrastructure planning. Are these companies internalizing these costs, or are they just pushing the negative externalities onto the local population?
That is the core of the political debate right now. Organizations like the Greater Cleveland Partnership have argued that local bans might leave regions behind in the next economic transformation, but citizens are demanding fair cost-bearing. If a data center forces a utility to upgrade the grid, build new substations, or expand transmission lines, who pays for that? Historically, those costs are often distributed among all ratepayers, meaning residential customers see their electric bills go up to subsidize a tech company's infrastructure. Community advocates argue that developers must fund the full incremental costs they drive so that residents are protected. Furthermore, the noise from hundreds of industrial chillers running 24/7 has become a major flashpoint. The hum is persistent. It alters the character of rural and suburban areas.
Here's a contradiction that makes this issue so difficult to resolve. People are angry. The protests in places like Ithaca, New York, and Ravenna, Ohio, where they passed a moratorium on data centers, show a genuine bipartisan resistance, but modern life relies entirely on this infrastructure. The internet people depend on every day is a physical thing. It is not just AI. It is healthcare systems, airline navigation, mobile banking, emergency dispatch, and remote work. The user commenting that nobody wants data centers probably submitted that comment using a device connected to a data center. We cannot simply ban the physical buildings that run the modern economy.
That paradox is what policymakers are struggling to navigate. The conversation often gets framed as a binary choice. Either we halt all data center construction to protect communities, or we let tech companies build whatever they want to secure national leadership in artificial intelligence. Neither path is realistic. If we stop building, cloud services will degrade, economic growth stalls, and the United States risks falling behind in global technological infrastructure. If we allow unregulated expansion, we risk rolling blackouts, depleted aquifers, and localized environmental degradation. The challenge is decoupling the growth of digital infrastructure from the degradation of local resources.
How do we actually achieve that decoupling? It sounds good in theory, but when a facility needs a gigawatt of power, that energy has to come from somewhere. The power grids in places like Virginia are already maxed out. I've read that in Virginia, data centers consume nearly a quarter of the state's total electricity supply. You cannot just magically invent more capacity without building new power plants, and those take years, if not decades, to permit and construct. It seems like the artificial intelligence industry has outpaced the physical reality of the power grid.
The industry has absolutely outpaced the grid, which is why we are seeing a shift in how these facilities are designed. Future data centers will have to incorporate grid interactive designs and load flexibility. This means during peak hours, when residential demand for electricity is high, the data center scales back its processing or relies on on-site energy storage and renewables. We're also seeing a push for closed-loop water systems where the cooling water is recycled rather than drawn continuously from municipal supplies. There's even exploration into using the waste heat generated by the servers to warm nearby residential or commercial districts, a model that has seen some success in Nordic countries. The technology exists to make these facilities better neighbors, but it requires capital investment and strict regulatory enforcement.
The regulatory aspect seems disjointed. We have federal directives pushing to fast-track permitting to maintain a competitive edge in AI, while local city councils are slamming the brakes because they are the ones dealing with the immediate fallout. We see the governor of Pennsylvania trying to thread the needle, offering tax incentives but also demanding transparency and environmental protections. However, a Quinnipiac poll shows the voters are not buying it. They feel left out of the decision-making process. The transparency issue is massive. People find out a giant server campus is being built only after the land is bought and the deals are signed. The lack of public input is driving the narrative that billionaires are simply imposing their will on small towns.
Transparency is often the first casualty in highly competitive industries. Tech companies use shell corporations and non-disclosure agreements to acquire land and secure power contracts because they do not want their competitors to know their expansion strategies. By the time the public is informed, it feels like a done deal, which breeds deep resentment. If a developer approaches a community transparently, outlines the exact water usage, proposes a closed-loop cooling system, guarantees that grid upgrades will be paid for by the corporation, and offers tangible local benefits, the reception is often different. The current backlash is a symptom of an industry that operated invisibly for decades and is now struggling to handle public scrutiny.
The scale is impossible to ignore now. You cannot hide a gigawatt power draw or the consumption of 5 million gallons of water a day. The real conversation is no longer about whether data centers should exist. They already exist, and we rely on them constantly. The core question for the next decade is how we build the physical infrastructure society demands without breaking the communities that host it. Artificial intelligence is not slowing down. Power demand is not shrinking. The infrastructure conversation is permanently out in the open. Sophia, the tension between our digital demands and our physical limits is going to define local politics for the foreseeable future.
It will define local politics, and it will force a reckoning on energy policy. We are reaching a point where the virtual world has physical consequences that everyday citizens are forced to confront. Until the industry proves it can scale responsibly, that friction will only intensify.
It is a complex trade-off that every community will have to weigh for themselves. Send a link to this episode to someone who relies on the cloud but worries about the grid.